Today I'm visiting Detroit, Michigan in the United States for the third time in 3 years. I've been really fascinated by the sociological and economic disasters that have befallen the Motor City, and most importantly, the creative and innovative ways that people have responded. We'll get to meet some of these folks as we go through the city. It's hard to believe that not so long ago, just 50 years, Detroit had a population of 1.8 million and had already seen its heyday of economic prosperity stemming primarily from the auto industry.
Detroit, center of America's great automobile industry, marks the 50th anniversary of its beginning. Birthplace of the production line and the new idea that almost everybody could have a car.
A downturn of that industry, coupled with racial tensions and riots in the late 1960s, started the downhill slide. The city shed over 2/3 of its residents to arrive at its current population of just 600,000. Perhaps the most symbolic building that has been abandoned in Detroit is the Packard plant. It was in production from 1903 to 1958, and at its peak, this manufacturer of luxury cars employed over 36,000 people and provided a good livelihood for them and their families. Today, it is a major source of ghostly blight and a painful reminder of the glory days. Despite many attempts to do something with this massive facility, it continues to deteriorate. Ranking a close second to the Packard plant as a symbol of Detroit's demise is the Michigan Theater. Built in 1926 on the birthplace of the Ford automobile and hailed as the world's finest theater, it has been left to decay since the late 1960s. Now it's a parking garage. Visiting the theater, with its ceiling and other fixtures still intact, has the feeling of scuba diving in the wreck of a luxury liner. Trying to envision what it was once like to be here, wearing black tie and enjoying the latest show.
There's just no other place like this, where the structures are still there, there's just nobody in them.
While a majority of people have left Detroit, some have stayed.
So we're headed to the Boggs Center for Community Leadership, which is an activist organization that's been around since the 60s.
Richard Feldman is an inspiring community activist whom I've had the pleasure of meeting before.
Here's a picture of James Boggs, who was born in Marion Junction, Alabama, and he wrote the book American Revolution, Pages from a Negro Worker's Notebook in 1963. And when I show it to folks now, and people buy that book, how prophetic it was.
Right. Where did this center come from, and then what's its position present day?
The James and Grace Lee Boggs Center to Nurture Community Leadership was created in 1996, 1997, a few years after James Boggs passed. James and Grace Boggs lived downstairs from 1962 onward. And both of them were active in the left movements of the 40s and the 50s, and then the Black Power and Civil Rights movement and the freedom movement of the 60s, and then every movement that came after that. Their biggest principle was that they saw themselves taking responsibility for the city and for the country, and saw themselves as governing. How do you create a movement that's going to govern, not only protest the injustices that's taking place?
Right. So the next step beyond protesting and actually taking charge and leading.
Leading with a vision, and also recognizing that there has to be a significant, deep cultural transformation. So the center's mission is to nurture community leadership. The three principles that guide the center of this is one, that the answer to growing inequality, whether it's in Detroit or the United States or the world, and environmental planetary destruction, is essentially local sustainable community production and self-governing democracy. The second is a lot of networking. So we network with folks across the city, across the country, across the globe. And the third, which is the most important part of the center, is that ideas really, really matter.
Right.
Because Jimmy and Grace were always very clear that the only purpose for revolution is the evolution of humankind.
What are the main areas of focus right now for the Bog Center.
We're working to figure out how do you create eco-villages, how do you create local sustainable communities, how do we use post-20th century, the 21st century technology to create healthy living with people. There's a gentleman named Vincent Harding. He talks about, I am a citizen of a country that does not yet exist. And what he says is, how do we create a compassionate country? How do we create a loving country? How do we create a sustainable country that's respectful of the land?
Detroit is this amazing space because all of these things are going on, right?
Detroit is an amazing space because folks have always found a way to make a way out of no way.
One of the most striking things about Detroit is its open space. For 50 years, people have left their homes, often walking out without selling. This has created a huge swath of 30,000 abandoned homes and 90,000 vacant lots. As the lots have returned to grass, it's hard to envision when these neighborhoods were thriving with people, families, and homes. The fight-back spirit of the city is symbolized by Joe Louis's fist. Louis, who grew up in Detroit, was the heavyweight boxing champion of the world from 1937 to 1949. Prominent downtown, his punch says that residents here haven't given up. Taking a cue from Joe Louis, the ingenious company Detroit versus Everybody has turned this fighting spirit into a motto and rallying cry. This notion of a city entering a next phase is further advanced by Detroit companies like Shinola and Quicken Loans. When I visited here in 2017, I volunteered alongside 30 Quicken employees at a food bank. They are given time off work to volunteer across the city. All of this open space in Detroit created opportunities for artists and creatives, like Tyree Guyton. Since 1986, he has single-handedly transformed 2 blocks of mostly abandoned lots into a large public art installation.
But the artist Tyree Guyton grew up on Heidelberg Street, and that's why the project is called the Heidelberg Project. And he grew up here in the 50s and 60s. And he said that growing up in this neighborhood was like paradise, that everything that you would need was right here. It was very densely populated. You can see now there's a lot of vacant land. There were so many houses that were here then that aren't here now. A very slow and gradual change, but I think the one thing that really kicked off a decline in this neighborhood was the riots that happened in 1967. So we're going to walk around today. I'll give you guys just a quick tour.
Who owns all of this land?
The art environment is about a 2-block radius. We own, I would say, about 25 to 30% of the lots over here. So we have residents that live here on the street. Other lots are owned by the city.
People left their houses.
Yeah.
They just walked out and never came back.
People had left this house almost with the intention that maybe they would come back, but they never did. And I don't know what happened. I think that a lot of houses in Detroit get kind of swallowed up by back taxes, or they go into foreclosure. Sometimes people will move out to live with relatives in another state and they just never come back.
Who has done the art? Has Tyree done everything, or do people contribute, or how does that work?
Tyree Guyton, the artist and founder of the Heidelberg Project, is the chief curator, primary artist here at the Heidelberg Project. Occasionally we do partner projects with other artists. The piece over here, the Code Pink Hummer, was a collaborative piece that we did with a women's peace group. The year that the last Hummer came off the assembly line, we wanted to give this one a proper burial.
That's very cool.
So here
I like
it
the
is.
tree coming up through the middle of it too.
Coming up. You've got a bicycle in front. Makes you think about being green. We've got a lot of changes going on here at the Numbers House, which is one of the oldest art installations on Heidelberg Street. The family that used to live in this house back in the day wanted to be part of the Heidelberg Project, so they let Tyree paint numbers all over the house. I remember seeing that. Yeah, as a result, the kids that lived in the house and the kids in the neighborhood learned how to count by the numbers on the house. We were able to purchase the house a couple years ago. Now we own the structure, and we are looking to turn it into a nonprofit neighborhood center.
Nice.
We'll have an artist living in the house upstairs.
Cool.
We'll have a gallery and a community space downstairs.
Awesome.
The house right here is by far the most famous house on Heidelberg Street. It's called the Dottie Waddy House, and it's the house where Tyree grew up. So he lived in this house with his 9 brothers and sisters, his mom Betty, and his grandfather Sam. When Tyree was 9 years old, his grandfather put a paintbrush in his hand He knew that from that point
That's cool.
forward, he wanted to become an artist.
Yeah.
He was in the U.S. Army. He also worked on an assembly line for Ford Motor Company.
Yep.
And he also worked as a firefighter. He decided to follow his dream to become an artist. He started to study at the College for Creative Studies here in Detroit, and he had a professor that really asked him, what do you want to do with your art?
Yeah.
So essentially, he was standing up here on this porch one day, and he had a vision to create the Heidelberg Project. He started the very next day.
Wow.
Yeah, had a lot of help
And
from.
here it is.
Here it is. Yeah, he had
That's
a
cool.
lot of help from his grandfather. A lot of kids in the neighborhood, and they just picked up all the junk they could find to turn it into art.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
When I look at Superman, I think about the time that Tyree was on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and he said that when he came back to his childhood neighborhood in the 1980s and saw how the neighborhood had really deteriorated, he said that he could see that a lot of people were waiting, that they were waiting for Santa Claus or Superman or the city to come out here and fix things, and he felt like these people would be waiting for a very long time. So he very much
Nobody's
felt,
coming.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I would
Right.
consider this installation to be a living, breathing art environment. Things are changing all the time. If you came here next year, the site might look completely different.
Right.
It's always changing.
Yep, that's
So I
cool.
think that's what makes it
Yeah,
cool
exactly,
and unique. You
exactly.
know? Tyree believes that we very much live in a throwaway society, where sometimes we throw away items, sometimes we throw away people,
Yep.
sometimes we throw away entire neighborhoods. But he believes that if you could pick these items up, brush them off, give them a fresh coat of paint and a new perspective, that it's possible to recycle the human spirit.
There's public art all over Detroit. There's an abundance of murals and street art in the Eastern Market area. In the center of the market is Carlos Nealbach's windmill creation. It generates enough energy to charge your phone. His wire warriors are located in the creek bed of an old hunting ground for Native Americans. One positive use of abandoned lots has been a booming urban farming movement. This is a great way to activate the spaces while giving area residents fresh produce and the positive benefit of feeling like they've made a tangible contribution.
I hear all the time that Detroit's coming back, or it's the big comeback.
Yep.
And a lot of people that live here are saying, you know, come back. We never went anywhere.
Yeah.
We've been here the whole time.
Yeah, yeah.
More than 50, 60, 70% of the people in the world live in cities. How will people live in cities?
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
a post-industrial city?
There's other cities like Detroit, or like the city that you live in now
Yeah,
in New
yeah.
Zealand, that's had a lot of challenges. I think that sometimes you have to be creative in terms of coming up
Absolutely.
with solutions.
Yep. Each time I leave Detroit, I realize that I will be back. The fight, the spirit, the creativity, and the innovation are addictive. In their own unique ways, the people I have met there are contributing to the wider narrative taking place all around the globe about placemaking, and how to do so with a focus on the individual. Even with the backdrop of the haunting Packard plant, or the tomb-like atmosphere in the Michigan Theater, the work of Richard Feldman at the Boggs Center, or Tyree Guyton at the Heidelberg Project feel as if they will win out.